So welcome to Avega Elevate. I think we have some guests here as well. So I'll do the spiel about what is Avega. We're a consulting company for about 450 people, mostly here in Stockholm, but also in Göteborg, Malmö, and in Oslo, across a range of technical specialties, of which web is one. And we run a series of talks like this internally and for customers and guests and friends. So, this evening we have a real treat for you. Our speaker tonight I have known for nearly 20 years. He and I used to be on web design mailing lists, arguing with idiots. It's what you do on mailing lists, right? Somebody is wrong on the internet. But one thing that really impressed me about Adrian is that he was absolutely passionate, has been for all the time I've known him, about doing things the right way, but also avoiding going the long way round to do it badly. Very focused on usability, very focused on accessibility, but always because there's a damn good reason to do it, not just because it's right, but because there's a good reason. So, when I heard he was doing some European conferences, I said, you've got to come here. You've got to talk to our web guys and guests, because this is really important, really good stuff. So I'm absolutely delighted that he's here. I can give you Adrian Roselli.
Thank you. I should warn you now, I only speak English.
Yeah,
so that was not fair. I'm going to be careful about standing in front of I don't want to blind anybody. Everybody. Okay. Usually I have a time limit. I don't have a time limit, so I figured 3-4 hours would probably be good to cover the material. To that end, if you want to ask questions while I'm going, please do. This topic can be a little dry for some people, me included. So if something jumps up, other people might appreciate the opportunity to stay awake, I suppose. But I'm going to talk about selfish accessibility. This is an idea that I have been promoting for a while. It's the idea that accessibility for just to satisfy a checklist or because it's the right thing to do doesn't do as well in an organization. But if you approach it from a perspective of supporting me being you, it tends to get a little bit more traction. So I have water here I'm going to move. I will need that shortly. So I have 2 slides here all about qualifying who I am and satisfying my ego. So I have co-written 4 books. I've worked on a 5th book as a tech editor. I've written a bunch of technical articles for online publications, print publications. There are actually some trees who have me to blame for having them felled, I think. And I've done, as Martin said, evolt.org, which if any of you is familiar with that, awesome. But it's an organization that has unfortunately seen its time come and go. I am a member of the W3C HTML working group. So the standards body, or the primary standards body in charge of HTML, I sit on that working group, as well as the accessibility task force, which is a subgroup. And we're dedicated to trying to make sure that the stuff we put together in HTML, in that specification, is accessible and makes sense. As Martin said, I've been around on the web for a while, since 1994. What is that, 21 years? I don't know how to do math in Swedish. I'm sorry. I have a company, a consulting company, Algonquin Studios. I've been doing that for 18 years next week, I think. So I've been screwing up projects and getting them right mostly for a very long time. I'm on the Twitters. I have a blog where I write all sorts of things about this stuff. So, I'm just going to dive right in. You might have seen the A11Y, and I'm putting this out there because if you ever want to find stuff about accessibility and see what people are talking about, you can follow that hashtag on Twitter, and you will see people ranting about all sorts of things. A lot of it is constructive. Some of it's just whining, which is fair. So, accessibility is a numeronym. If you take the first and last letter, and you cut out everything in between and replace it with the number of characters, which is 11, you get A11Y. It works well on Twitter, as I said. You might have seen L10N and I18N. Those are similar numeronyms for localization and internationalization. I like to do that because sometimes if people are live tweeting at conferences, then they start using the hashtag, or they start to look it up and see what other people think of me, which is hilarious in real time. So this is an image of my office, part of my office. We've been going through a renovation, and this furniture will all be gone when I get home. When I get back, the office is going to look awesome. But this is shortly after we had a bunch of work done and repainting. So the ceiling, the dark gray that we have for the ceiling is called cyberspace. That's the name that Sherwin-Williams gave the paint. The blue is called online, and that green is Lime Ricky. We couldn't find a green that had a cool web technology name. This is the color they're going to paint my office, accessible beige. This is going to be a joke. This is the color of IBM computers from the 1980s. It is the most boring, plain, unpleasant color out there. And that's where accessible lives in the world of paint colors. So we're going to go through some statistics. I'll explain this model of being selfish. I'll talk about some techniques and basic testing. And then for those of you who are more technical, I'll have some technical bits. I'll talk about HTML and ARIA and some best practices. If you're not technical, I can fly through that, and you can slow me down with questions. If I see everybody falling asleep, I will probably know, but I love the technical bits, so I might spend some time in there. And you probably should ask questions as I am going. So, jumping into statistics. I happen to live in the United States, so I have preference for U.S. statistics. As such, within the U.S., people who have any kind of disability, visual, hearing, mobility, cognitive, 21 to 64-year-old age group, 10%. When you look at the 75 and up age group, you're looking at 50%, half the population. And you'll see I keep referencing age breakdowns for a reason, although it's going to be pretty obvious pretty quickly. So worldwide, 285 million people have some sort of vision impairment. And this comes in all forms, from myopia to just total vision loss, complete and utter blindness. And there's a pretty broad spectrum there for vision loss. And you can see in my numbers that the percentage of people increases with age. Hearing impairments, 360 million people worldwide, disabling hearing loss, which means that they are limited in the things that they can do because they can't hear the same way that somebody with normal hearing can. And as you can see, that number increases to about half the population once you get up to 75 years old and above. Mobility impairments, this, I really wasn't able to list them all. This can include everything from tremors to palsy to just lack of fine motor control to having equipment on you that limits your ability to move. But we're looking at as low as 5.5% all the way up to about 33% once you get up to 75 and above. Cognitive impairments are a little bit more difficult. There is an ongoing debate in the accessibility community about what constitutes a cognitive impairment. And I've listed some examples. Dyslexia, which if you're not familiar with it, I assume this translates. If you're not familiar with dyslexia, struggling with the printed word. Dyscalculia is similar to that, except it's with numbers, where you struggle with parsing numbers and handling numbers in groups. Memory issues, ADD, ADHD, which are both related to attention and your ability to stay focused on tasks. And that number also continues to climb with age. There is overlap in some of these disabilities. It's possible if you have one, you might have another one. But there isn't always overlap. So some of these numbers you can safely look at as cumulative. That there is a chance that you will have, actually a very high chance that you will have multiple, but if you spread it out, you're still going to have maybe a quarter of the population, depending on which population you're targeting and under which circumstances. So I'm going to give you my thesis of how to be selfish. WebAIM is an accessibility organization out of Australia. Accessibility in mind is what the AIM stands for. And they have this great chart about how you motivate accessibility change within an organization. And they recognize at the start you probably have to guilt people. You have to tell them they're terrible, terrible people for not supporting accessibility. And maybe you move up to punishing them. You know, penalties are sometimes a great motivator. Make it a requirement. They have to do it. They don't like it. They don't understand it, but you make them do it. ultimately, you move on, not ultimately, almost ultimately, you move on to rewarding them. You want to get them to be enlightened and understand it to the point where they're inspired. And by being inspired, they should just do it in all of the tasks that they're doing. I have a different outlook on this. I believe that it's really making it about me. So it's the star on top of that tree. I don't know that the people at Webbing like this. I haven't asked them. And I'm not going to ask them. So all of these, but once you start thinking about yourself, it's amazing how well developers focus on these things. So, getting older. Getting older affects nearly everybody. It will probably affect everybody in this room. I say this with a high degree of confidence, unless the mortality rate in this room jumps dramatically, I'll feel bad. But it will affect everybody. As I note here, it carries risks and side effects, not for the young. In this image, this couple and this couple, other than the 6 feet that separates them, it's probably only about 40 years that separates them. There's not much different between them. Frankly, I think they're both trying to figure out where to go next. Where are we going to have lunch? Similar concept. The only thing separating these two women, probably about 40 years. But they're doing the same thing. One might be using technology, but frankly, she's also using technology. They're just using different technology. They're sitting in the sun. They're reading. Really no difference there except for age. You might think you're not going to get that old, but accidents might be something that gives you some sort of disability or situational disability. Broken limbs, eye injuries, hearing injuries, standing in front of the speaker stacks at concerts, head trauma. These are all things that happen to people. This is somebody's mouse hand. So now you have this thing and you're trying to use the mouse or the keyboard. That gets pretty tricky. Probably did that skiing. You could have an eye injury and now you're down to one eye, limited 3D vision, makes it a little bit more difficult to use the keyboard and the mouse. This is a fashion choice. It's really just a fashion choice. I actually tried to do my hair like that for tonight. This is head trauma to come, but they might have a cognitive disability in advance. That's a wheel of cheese. They've decided that they all desperately want that wheel of cheese, so they're chasing it down a hill. I don't know. I thought this was in Scotland. Maybe you could enlighten me? No?
North of England, I think.
Oh, okay. Regardless.
We chase haggis.
Oh, it doesn't go very fast, does it? If you're like me, you might think that you are invincible, despite the row of scars I have above all of my head. Situational disabilities really do affect everybody, and they affect you in different ways. Multitasking is a situational disability, it's a cognitive impairment. Being in the sunlight can be a visual impairment. Eating at your desk, mobility and potentially cognitive impairment. Not having headphones can limit your ability to use hearing properly. And having the content not in your native language is a surprising cognitive impairment that being here today, being in your country, you're all lovely. But being in your country gets a little difficult when I look at the menu and I go, I don't know what to do with all the umlauts. I really don't. And I apologize for that. So a point that I like to make pretty frequently, everybody is a keyboard user when eating with their mouse hand. I'm assuming everybody here has had something to eat at their desk. And when you're doing that, you probably move pretty quickly away from the mouse and over to the keyboard. And if you've tabbed through a page, you are behaving as a disabled or impaired user. It's a situational disability. Not my cat, not my house, not my laptop. But I have been in this situation where I have worked in the sun, and when the sun is glaring on my screen, I cannot see everything that's on there. So low contrast pages, pages with the text too small becomes completely illegible to me. These guys, I respect their ability to be wildly inefficient. They put down a tarp, so they're staying dry, potentially, but on the phone, smoking, I thought I saw food in one of the times I viewed this, but these guys are the epitome of the situational disability, or situational impairment, because they have the sun and distractions and no mouse hand. Not as good as this guy. He really doesn't like the sun, and yes, that's a typewriter. Which, by the way, if you're going to go to the park and write the great American or great Swedish novel, why not a typewriter? That's, yeah. I like the two women sitting next to him. They look a little scared. This is an example of a gentleman in a cafe who, probably as a courtesy to those in the cafe, or maybe because he can't hear, is using his headphones probably to do some video editing. He couldn't do that if he didn't have the headphones. It'd probably be a little bit more difficult. So he is using some assistive technology because his hearing is impaired. This is a case where maybe you want to do work in bed, or you want to watch Netflix, or you need to watch a training video, and you don't want to wake your significant other. So you might rely on subtitles, or headphones, or captions. Doesn't need to be your spouse. It can just be a dog who kicks violently in the middle of the nowhere. We'll go with spouse. Sorry, my wife is sitting over there. That's okay. Never mind. So this is sort of an example of my living situation. I live in a house, not one of these apartments, but on either side of my house, there is somebody who owns a motorcycle. So on one side is a guy with a Harley, and on the other side is a guy with a Honda. And it is a beautiful, beautiful cornucopia of sound. It is a melody when they decide that it's gotten warm enough that they want to ride their motorcycles, because they both rev up. And they do it any time of the day. They don't care. So because I have a motorcycle on either side of my house, I keep closed captions on my television permanently, because I never know when they're going to start it, and I might get into that really good part of the X-Files rerun over and over. And the closed captions allow me to still hear it, or at least understand what's going on once they start revving their motorcycles. So I have temporary hearing loss because of these guys until they leave their driveway and the village and part of the city, because loud. She is very much emulating how I feel when I have been in foreign countries a couple times, when I didn't have Wi-Fi and I had to use the computer in the hostel or in the hotel. And I'm desperately trying to figure out a train schedule or my flight, and I can't get anything in my native language. The keyboard, the screen, the menus, etc. And that feeling of being trapped is very difficult. And that language barrier is some form of cognitive impairment. Ideally temporary if you go home, and if not, well, you'll learn eventually. The final point is tech support. So when I go home for the holidays, I'm the computer guy. I'm the one who's asked to fix the printer. I'm the one who has to make Netflix go. I'm the one who has to empty the browser cache, clear all the add-ons, the Ask Jeeves toolbar, the Java app. I mean, I do all that stuff. I'm doing all this tech support every time I go there. And it's not just family, it's friends' family, which is awkward. But I spend a lot of time helping, not my family, this is off a flicker. I spend a lot of time sitting down and working on the computer. And that is lost time. And part of the reason I'm doing that is because the things they are using are not easy to use. Because they are very much targeted toward the 20-something developer who can read and see everything. So that big green download button is really appealing to them. And while that is a dark pattern, it is also an accessibility issue. So the general message that I'm trying to get across with this is that supporting accessibility now is going to help future you. The older you, the you in the far-flung future, and you'll be thankful for that. It also helps the injured you and the encumbered you. So when you have hurt yourself, when you are working in the sun, etc., if you're using the things that you built, you'll be better off for it, and you'll be happy for that. But more importantly, if you can get younger developers to buy into this concept, you don't have to be the only one carrying the water on this. As you age out of, and not necessarily by years of age, but experience, as you move out of that developer role or that manager role or whatever your role is today where you can influence that, you want that entire team, that entire generation coming up behind you to continue to support that. So when you're not writing the code and when you're not dictating the standards, you'll still have confidence that the software will be written in a way that supports you as you age, as you become injured, as you get stuck working in the cafe, and keep adding on items. So I'm going to go through some techniques. These are not the technical ones, even though technical. So is everybody here familiar with user stories? Okay, I'm going to move ahead as if you are. I have a brief description of user stories. I'm going to jump into some examples of selfish user stories. So whenever I'm trying to sneak something into a project, an accessibility feature into the project, I might write a selfish user story and see if I can sneak it past anybody. So as a user on a sunlit patio, I want to be able to read all the content and see all the controls on the page. If I'm a user in bed with a sleeping spouse, I want to watch this training video in silence so I can get caught up at work. In order to click links as a user with no elbow room, in coach class, with a tiny trackpad, I need the click areas to be vague. By the way, this affects me on the flight here, for example, where they literally pack us in where we're sitting on each other's laps. And if I try to click something over here, the guy in the next seat's got a black eye. Works on trains, too. As a user distracted by the television, I want clear headings and labels so I don't lose my place on the page. It makes it easier for me to scan through it. So these map to real impairments. People who are struggling with these every day. A keyboard-only user wants to be able to use the entire application that you have built. They want to be able to navigate their product list with the tab key so maybe they can find the right thing that they want. And in order to click links as a limited mobility user, whatever the reason, you need click areas to be large enough and adequately spaced. So these are user stories that support disabilities. I've just framed them in advance with the selfish angle. Visual impairment. Colorblind users want to be able to see the links. They don't want them to be hidden. As a low vision user, I want to be able to zoom the page so I can read the content. As a fully blind user, I want to use a screen reader to navigate. Hearing impairment. Low hearing user, I want to be able to access the transcripts. My screen reader can parse those for me. As a low hearing user, screen reader is the wrong word. Totally flipped that around in my head. As a low hearing user, I want access to closed captions so that I can use the training videos. And in order to participate in a webinar, depending on your audience, as a deaf user, you want real-time captioning or transcripts. I have been to a few conferences where they have somebody doing the real-time captioning and doing sign language up front. It adds nominal cost, but depending on your audience, it's a really nice feature to be able to offer. I know it doesn't apply to all scenarios, but it's something worth thinking about, especially if you're considering the entire audience. For cognitive impairment, as a user with vestibular disorder, I want to disable parallax scrolling. Vestibular disorder is when you're seeing those movements and you start to get your balance affected. If anybody was familiar with, I think it was iOS 6, when you tap an icon and the icons would shoot toward you or away from you, or the app would fly toward you to launch. Somebody did the physics on that, and I guess it would hit you at like 39 miles an hour if it was real. But that was causing a problem with people with that vestibular disorder. Same thing with web pages that have parallax scrolling, where as you scroll, some elements scroll more slowly. That can create some trouble, and allowing them to turn that off is a nice feature. As a user with that number issue I mentioned before, distinct number fields for each block of digits in the credit card field would be handy so that they can continue to purchase the product. In order to not get confused on pages with long text passages, as long as a paragraph, a user with dyslexia, I want control over text size, spacing, and alignment. It really can be that simple. Personas. I made a miniature persona for me. This is not a real persona. But what I did is I folded in some examples. That photo, by the way, is off of some official ID I use for credit cards and other things. You'd be amazed how people allow this. They just don't care. They really don't care. So when I'm working on personas, it's one thing to have a persona that has, I'll jump ahead of screen, it's one thing to have personas that have disabilities as part of the focus. So you might have a blind persona, you might have a low hearing persona. And there's a great book by Sarah Horton and Whitney Questenberry about writing personas for the web for disabled users. The problem with that is a lot of organizations, when they're dealing with a suite of personas, might say we need to get it down to 4 to 6. Perfectly valid number. So which one do you think gets cut first? The blind user? Tossed away. So instead of trying to create that persona with a disability, you instead try to fold in aspects of disabilities that don't necessarily get picked up by the developers. Focus on the things the developers understand. So if I say, here's my persona, oh, and by the way, this guy's colorblind, and here's my persona, and by the way, this one has multiple sclerosis, those are going to get ignored pretty quickly. But if you make a persona where you put in some tangible things, works basically in reverse of everybody else. Lives between motorcycles, works late with the TV on, uses the subtitles all the time when on Netflix, keeps all screens as dark as possible. One that has actually gotten traction, and maybe I'll swap it out, but it's not me, is works on the train, the very bumpy train, crammed in between people, and now you've got the mobility impairment. Because if you can put something in there that maybe the boss has, an experience that exists within the organization, that one is probably going to stay in the persona, and you've just stealthily and selfishly folded in support for a disability that might not have been cut otherwise. There is a manifesto for accessible UX coming. In the meantime, it's been folded into some of these resources. UK Covenant Data Center, they're doing some good stuff. There's also an accessible design maturity continuum being developed. It's based on Jess McMullen's rough design maturity continuum. If you got some familiarity with that, it's following the same basic flow. It's just folding in some extras. I wish I could give you more detail. It's just not done yet. And when it is, I'm going to steal it and make like 40 slides out of it. Because why not? So I'm going to run through some basic tests. And these are the kinds of tests that anybody in this room can do. I'm going to do it on web pages because I get to use this talk with a lot of people. It's the broadest example, and so much software is deployed on the web that it fits pretty well. So one thing you can do is click on the labels on fields. You probably have built or worked on or used a form. Doesn't matter how awesome or specific your web-based application is, it probably has form fields. Click on the field labels. When you do that, does the focus move to the corresponding field, or with the checkbox or radio button, does it toggle the field? So if that doesn't happen, that's a problem because you're missing the opportunity to build in support for assistive technologies. Creating that connection, just creating that connection, is a dramatic help to users of all sorts of assistive technologies. It will speak it, it will connect them, it will allow them to access the field directly from the label. So lean on that feature. And it has the added benefit of people like me who click on the checkbox, the text next to the checkbox. It's usually a bigger hit area. Now you've supported that generic user as well. One of my favorites is unplug your mouse. My second favorite is unplug the mouse of the guy next to you. See if you can still use the application or the web page. If you can, you're probably in good shape. If you can't, you might have a bit of a problem. One of my favorite things to test with new developers is, does the tab order match your expectation? If I'm tabbing through your field, I expect I'm going to go first field, second field. If I end up at the submit button, and then fourth field, fifth field, reset button, eighth field, seventh field, then you've got a problem, and you need to fix that. Not only is it a problem for disabled users, it's just a problem in the application. It shouldn't flow that way. And this gives you a good sense of whether it will linearize well. You also want to make sure you can see what item on the page has the focus. In a web page example, that navigation item not only has focus thanks to the outline feature built into the browser, but it also has the same highlight as the hover style in the web browser. So as I tab through it, I'm going to see exactly what I would see as if I was hovering over those elements with my mouse. Turn off images. If you can still make sense of the page without the images, pretty good. If large swaths of content go missing, blocks of text, that means that text is set as an image and is completely inaccessible to a screen reader unless you have really verbose alt text behind it. So here's an example. Same site. By the way, this is our inner city youth soccer program that we started a bunch of years ago in my hometown of Buffalo, New York. Usually I spend more time bragging about it, but I don't think any of you are going to give me money for the program. I mean, I'm guessing here. So I'll spare you that. But I'm really proud of this because it's an awesome thing. So here's a page about the club history. If I turn off the images, it still looks the same. That big picture of the smiling kid running through a field about to kick the soccer ball. What do you call a football ball? Football? Just a football? Okay. So he's about to kick the ball. We're just going to go easy on this one. We don't need a big description behind it. It's blank. There's no alt text, and that's okay. That's okay because it's strictly a decorative image. It doesn't bring additional value to the user and the screen reader. It's strictly decorative. If the image had value, I would have good alt text behind it. An example of that is the logo. It says Buffalo Soccer Club. That's what lives behind that logo. You'll note over in the navigation here, those images go away. It's okay, not a problem. In the navigation at the top, the images went away. And that's okay, it's not a problem because everything is still usable. There is alt text behind these images, it's just not visible because of the nature of the way the browser, in this case Chrome or Internet Explorer, Chrome doesn't expand. Firefox will expand it to hold all of the text. Which can mess with the text, with the page layout, whatever. It's an edge case anyway. Your users aren't going to experience that unless they're already leaning on assistive technology. High contrast mode. If you use Windows, Windows has a neat feature called high contrast mode. Left Alt key, left Shift key, and print screen, and it will make sure that you want to do it. Background images and colors are replaced. Images really are dumped, and background colors get set to something you will not expect. Text colors are replaced, and if it makes your site unusable, you have a problem. So the same page in high contrast mode. You can still see everything. All the background images that existed elsewhere have gone away. But the page is still usable. It's still there. There are media queries that will allow you to tweak things. So a media query, dash MS dash high contrast, I don't know, I have code samples. There is a media query that will allow you to do things like move things around, make things bold, basically do other changes that are still visual, because high contrast mode is a visual feature. Still visual and still easy for people to use even after the text colors and background images have been replaced. One of my favorites, and also the quickest way to see the designer on the team cringe, turn off all the CSS. Just turn it off. Delete the reference to the external CSS file, turn it off in your browser, who cares? It's hilarious for a moment. Does important content disappear? Are you using CSS to generate content that wouldn't otherwise be there? You might have a problem. Do your error messages rely exclusively on visual cues? You might have a problem. Is the content still in a reasonable order? If you have 2 columns of content and suddenly what should be second suddenly moves first, you might have a problem. Another thing to pay attention to, do styles still remain in the page? So you've turned off CSS. If there's still a big block with a background color and styled text, etc., if that's still there, that means somebody's putting inline styles into your content. You might know this and that might be okay. But if you're not expecting it, it's a great way to test that third-party tools, features, developers, in-house, whatever, aren't injecting things that shouldn't be there. So this is the same page without CSS. You'll note the scroll bar is a good deal down. I scrolled down past the navigation. It's a big bullet list, so I just scroll past it. I have a skip link in there, and it would take you to this point in the page. But breadcrumb's still there, the content's still there, the text doesn't wrap around the image. Okay, big deal. But the page is still usable. As a content page, it's still usable. Forms can still be usable. You don't necessarily need the CSS in order for everything to work. And I say this because a lot of assistive technology bypasses the CSS. Screen readers for the blind bypass the CSS. Not all of it, but for the scope of what I'm talking about. Tests for color blindness and color contrast. I linked to 4 tools. These slides will be available afterwards, so you can get those links. But you want to make sure there's enough contrast that you can read that text on the page. Gray text on a gray background, terrible, terrible, terrible. Even in my 20s, I hated it. Now that I've long forgotten my 20s, I still hate it. You still want your hyperlinks and menus to be visible. That same page we've been looking at, this is how it's viewed with protanopia. This is with deuteranopia, and this is with tritanopia. Everything, as I back through them, is still visible. The contrast is still there, regardless of your color blindness. It's not a hard test to do. There are some ratios that are already set up in the standards and the specifications, and if you follow those, you'll be in great shape. If any of you do work with rich media, audio and video, just video, etc., look for the captions and transcripts. You want to make sure there are text alternatives. You want them to be a simple link. So as you're going through the page, you can just click the link and get the text version of it. If possible, having the closed captions embedded directly is a great way to go. Audio descriptions are really handy as well. I have listed some tools. You can even rely on YouTube's ability to auto close caption. It will be terrible. It's terrible with English. It's already terrible with English. But the nice thing about it is at least it gets it in there, and now you can go through and correct it and set up all the timings to make sure it fits. It's a really good first step, and these tutorials can walk you through that process. There is a video online, The Lady Vanishes. It's the full movie. And they do a great job of offering not just the closed captions, but also the descriptions. So if the door slams in the background, it says door slams. Certainly there's a risk of spoiler, but hopefully that doesn't happen too often. And there's a menu in YouTube that will allow you to choose between the different captions and subtitles. Great feature, not too hard to do. It is more of a time investment than most of the other accessibility stuff that you'll do. But when you do it, it's there. And hopefully you'll get a search engine ranking boost because all the text will be indexable. And if not, that's okay because that's not the real reason to do this. Hyperlinks. I think hyperlinks are sort of the whole reason the web exists. Great opportunity to do things right and great opportunity to mess things up. Click here, more, link to. If you've seen random WordPress site, they probably all use that. You go to home pages and they have links to press releases and they all end in the same. That's useless to a screen reader who's navigating by audio cues because they'll just hear all the links. Click here, click here, click here, click here. And it's really annoying. As a visual user, I hate them because I visually scan the page looking for hyperlinks. And when I see 800 click here, it's like, now I have to read the entire sentence. I hate reading. If you're using all caps or URLs or emoticons, screen readers do weird things with them. All caps looks like shouting to me. A screen reader will read out every letter. And that can take a long time and be terribly annoying. Same with URLs, emoticons, same thing. Yes?
Question about that. All caps, if you write the HTML with small caps and then slide it with CSS to uppercase, will the screen reader treat it as all caps?
It depends on the screen reader and the screen reader browser combination. So the funny thing is, as far as Chrome, for example, is concerned, once you style it, it is all uppercase. It doesn't see the original text. It just says, yeah! Firefox will go, yeah, okay, we'll make it big, but yeah. And then whatever screen reader somebody has layered on top of that will follow what the browser's lead is. So a screen reader that uses Chrome is going to spell it all out. A screen reader using Firefox isn't going to have that problem. So I use all caps sparingly, but I also recognize they're sort of a typographic thing, and I might use them for headings, but my headings are usually briefer, and it's a little bit less annoying than an entire paragraph or long passage of text. Does that help? Okay. Are you warning users before you open new windows? That's just courtesy. But still, you should warn users. Primarily because if you're using assistive technology and it pops open a new window, there's a whole set of tasks that the user has to fire in their brain in order to go close that window or go back. Screen reader launched a whole new page. They can't go back. They can't just hit the back button. They have to navigate to the browser's Chrome, close it. Somebody with a mobility impairment now needs to move the mouse or change the focus in order to get to that close button in order to get back. So it's no longer one key and you're out. This way they can decide if they want to follow the link. Do links to downloads provide helpful info. Also, just good practice. Tell somebody before you make them download a 10 meg PDF so that they can see the menu at that restaurant. Really, a 10 meg restaurant menu, we've experienced that so many times. You're sitting in the car and it's like, am I going in? Do you only have salad? I want to know. Are you using pagination links? If so, be smart about them. Make it clear that they are pagination. Are your links underlined? If they are not underlined, then at least make sure that they are incredibly obvious. Is there alt text for any image links? Because if the image goes away, you need to tell people what that link really does. And is the link text consistent? This one is, I feel pretty strongly about this. I know a lot of others don't. If I'm linking to the same piece of content, like the restaurant menu PDF every time, I should always say I'm linking to the menu. That way I'm not surprised because I bypassed it one time or I've already downloaded it one time. I don't need to go through it again. And having consistent link text is a good idea. That's also a good SEO practice, by the way. This is an example of hyperlinks with no underlines. This is a popular Webotron site. And when viewed with two types of color blindness, those hyperlinks can recede into the page pretty quickly and make it hard to figure out where you're supposed to click. They failed the contrast ratio test. So I'm going to move into some of the technical bits. I'm probably going to do these a little bit of a higher level because I don't think everybody here is super technical, and if you want me to stop and go into more detail, I will. And if the room falls asleep, we can chat about it afterward. It's worth noting, if you get me talking about one of these, you should probably just set aside an hour of your life. And the only reason it's that brief is because eventually I have to go home. Because I think I'm only allowed in the country for how many days? So, accessibility is not a checklist. A lot of people will approach accessibility as if, here are all the specs, here are all the things you need to do, check them off as you go. It's not a checklist. If you do that, you end up with this wonderful thing I call the stair ramp. I love this example because so many accessibility talks include this as a beautiful way to do accessibility in design, and they're so very wrong it hurts. So the problem with this is the normal person who's walking along is going to stumble every time they get to the ramp. The normal person who is taking his or her wheelchair is going to die. And that's because the angle on this is too steep. And it ends in a wall, or it ends in careening out of control into God knows what, or down some stairs. It's too narrow. There are no good visual cues, and it's way too long of a run. So this might look like a great example of integration. It's not. It's terrible. I include a link at the bottom where you can read some more information. But if you see this, if you ever at another accessibility talk and they mention this, save this link and just be like, dude, you are so wrong. And then you can send them to me and we'll fight and it'll be hilarious. Accessibility is not a checklist. It is an ongoing process. It's a continuum. Something you need to maintain. Guy in Quebec. They have the ramp. They have the wheelchair ramp. But they put 2 potted plants on it and they haven't shoveled it all winter long. He just posted this a couple weeks ago. And I asked if I could use this in a talk, and he said, only if you can get them to please shovel the damn ramp. I'm violating that agreement because I could not get them to shovel the ramp. But this is an example of, okay, you did that thing that you're supposed to do, but if you're not maintaining it, you're actually making a really angry user instead of supporting a user you might not have had to begin with. There is this wonderful technology called ARIA, Web Accessibility Initiative, Accessible Rich, oh, you can put it up there, Accessible Rich Internet Applications. It's like I'm quizzing myself. Did I get it right? Okay. This is an add-on to HTML. You can use it with HTML5. You can use it with HTML4. You can use it with all of them because it's an extension specification. It adds accessibility information where it might not exist already, and it provides more detail than the standard HTML element might provide on its own. It can be used, as I said, with any version. It's been around for a while. That's when it was published, but it's been in practice for easily 5 or more years, and browser support is getting really good. If you use ARIA, if you're tempted to use ARIA, if somebody says that's okay, we'll sprinkle ARIA magic fairy dust on it and make things work, I have some rules. If you can use a native HTML5 element, use it. Don't use, I'm going to keep using this example, don't use a div as a button when there's such thing as a button element. Don't use a div as a hyperlink when there's such thing as an anchor element. Use the correct element for the task. It's just good practice. If you're doing ARIA to make it go, it's a bad idea. Don't change the native semantics of an element. And each one has a very specific role on the page. When you change it to a role button, You're blowing that up. You're confounding the assistive technology and potentially confounding the user because you're probably forgetting how to do it correctly. All interactive ARIA controls must be usable with the keyboard. Pretty straightforward. Users must be able to do the exact same thing with the keyboard as they would do with the mouse, a stylus, a finger, etc. Don't use role presentation or ARIA hidden true on an element that receives focus. If you do that, you'll never actually be able to give it focus, so now you've just broken it and taken it out of the page flow. And this fifth one is relatively new. I can do a 2-hour talk just on the concept of the accessible name, because the way the browser figures it out is about, I think it's a 45-step process in order to calculate it, which means you have 45 ways to get it right. So all interactive elements must have an accessible name, whether it's the alt text or an ID or just a block of text within it. Make sure you have it. Visible text on a button is the accessible name. Invisible alt text on an image is the accessible name. If you're following those best practices, you're probably in good shape with this one. So here's an example of what not to do with HTML and ARIA. Don't take a div and give it an on-click handler because it's not going to work for everybody. And you'll find you'll need to give it a tab index in order to make it keyboard focusable. And then you'll need to give it an on-key press event to continue to support keyboard users. And then you'll need to give it a roll button in order to satisfy all those users on assistive technologies or who are just using more modern browsers. This is the better way to do it. It's just a button. That's it. And you're going to do your key press anyway because not all the browsers support it, but that's it. Just use a button. ARIA doesn't fix everything. I linked to a couple articles if you are interested in ARIA, if you use it. These are really good diatribes, rants, intelligent ramblings about how ARIA can't fix everything. You can't rely on it to fix stuff that you have broken right from the start. HTML5 has all these really nice elements built in from the start. You can just lean on those. You don't even need to lean on ARIA if you're looking at using these properly. They're built in. Header, nav, main, use one per page. The WhatWig specification suggests that you can use more than one per page. That's the specification, but it's wrong because there's really only one main content area. It will screw your users up. Aside, footer, form, using that with your search form, for example. Not all the assistive technology has support for these yet. They're still playing catch up on this, and that's okay. So in the meantime, continue to add the roles where appropriate. There's only going to be one role banner on a page. You can use the header in many different elements, but you're only going to have one that is the page header. So you only use role banner once. Same thing with role main, and same thing with role content info. The footer, there should only be one page footer, and that gets the role content info. You continue to use footers in your block quotes, in your figure elements, whatever suits you, not a problem. You can do that. Only one role content info. So looking at the generic desktop layout, I sort of mapped this out. And when I say generic desktop layout, this is just while I'm viewing it on a wider screen and somebody's presumed I'm on a desktop. So there's my header, my navigation, my footer, my main content area, the sample aside, and my search. And yes, probably swap those if you want people to see it above the fold. And then the generic mobile layout, which again is just a narrow screen. Still can be triggered by anything you want, but we'll pretend. So header, nav, form, main, site. So just examples of how those would map to the content areas you're already used to using in your page, in your application. Please use the HTML5 headings. Use them in order. Don't skip. Don't do H1, H4, H2, H4. Just don't do that. It creates a very clear structure, and not only do the search engines really like it, but assistive technology relies on it so that users can navigate a page by headings and by heading structure. Some of you might have heard about the HTML5 document outline algorithm. It's a lie. It's a filthy, filthy lie. It's in the specification, and it's a filthy lie. And they have acknowledged this, and they have started to update the specification. I have a really long, ranty article linked at the bottom here. And it's because of that rantiness and me pestering a couple people in the committee with me that they're changing the specification to say nobody supports this. It's just this beautiful, hypothetical, pure model that will never work. But we really like the idea. It's just not going to work. The new divitis. section ARIA, article abuse. So you see divs taking the role of everything. More and more people are using section and article in the same way they would use divs. I see sections that have on-click handlers. I see articles that are used as hyperlinks, and it's wrong. Because these actually map to regions in the page, and assistive technology relies on that in order to understand that we've reached a new context, a new block of content, a new thing we need to parse a little bit differently. And when that is every link or every button on the page, you're actually making it far worse than if you had just left it. My rule of thumb is if it doesn't get a genuine heading level, don't use it. It probably doesn't need to be a section unless it warrants its own heading level. And if it shouldn't be in the document outline, don't use it. Focus styles. I'm going to let this play for a minute. I am tabbing through this page. This is an animated GIF. I don't know where the hell my cursor is. I'm just tabbing through the page. This is the Virgin America site, which has been written up. Oh wait, it scrolled, so my cursor is somewhere. This has been written up. Where am I again? So this was written up by a lot of sites as a really, really nifty example of all the new cool things you can do in HTML. Except it's completely and utterly unusable with a keyboard. And by the way, to make that work with the keyboard, they have to remove one line of CSS. Which I have noted in email, on Twitter, as a bug on the web platform, web dev bug site, etc., which guarantees they're never going to listen to me because I'm officially a crazy person. But it really is one line of code. It's the outline none. Just remove that. Everything will be better. You need focus styles. It's necessary for keyboard use. Whenever you are doing a hover style, make sure that there is a corresponding focus style. If you are using a third-party library like a Bootstrap or Eric Meyer's CSS Reset, go in there and look for outline none and delete it. Or comment it out and just put a note about how awesome you are. But get rid of it because setting the outline to none will destroy somebody's ability to navigate through with their keyboard. Look, I even made a tweet out of it. One weird trick. It's amazing. This guy has gotten a lot more tweets since I originally screen capped this. Apparently, if you use the BuzzFeed style of headlines, people pay attention. Weird. Never would have thought that. Alternative text. I'm going to spare you a little bit of this. These are all different ways you can get alternative text on an image. These are all valid. Just use the alt. Don't stress yourself about these other options. Use the alt text. You're in good shape. There is something called long desk. If you don't know what long desk is, don't worry about it. Not a big deal. It has been around for like 15, 20 years, but it wasn't included in HTML5. After a long and weird fight, it finally got re-included. Long desk allows you to put an attribute called long desk on an image, and that attribute contains the URL, just a URL, that points to a long description. That's what long desk means, long description. And it's a fully formatted, put anything you want, full web page. And if a user wants to read the full description of that image, they can, and if they don't, that's okay. Not a big deal. It's really handy for, what do you call those pictures?
Infographic.
Thank you. Infographic. I hate infographics for that reason. But with a long desk, you can make an infographic a little bit less awful. There's a whole decision tree that goes behind it. Don't worry about that. So that's the gist of my talk. I've got one question throughout. I'm going to ask you if you have any other questions, but I'm going to tell you before you do that, I've got this really nifty resources. How people with disabilities use the web. It's a great quick read. First review of web accessibility, really simple stuff, a lot of which I've covered in these slides. Some of them might be more technical, some of them might make more sense because my delivery method is a little dry. Nobody fell asleep, so I didn't say completely dry. The aging web user is a thing. I have information about ARIA and links to that information in the specs. And then I've got accessibility tips, designing for the elderly, writing user stories, a web for everyone, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. And that is the sum total of my presentation. And I don't know how long it was supposed to take, but I got like 3 more hours of ranting at me. So, I just gave this talk. I gave a half-hour version of this talk earlier this week, was it? On Monday? Oh my God. So I'm still primed to talk about this, and I'm still focused on trying to get it done quickly. So if I rambled or spoke quickly and still sort of rambled, I'm sorry. But questions will help focus this. Yes.
Yeah, that was definitely a great presentation. Thanks.
Thank you. It's very nice of you to say.
You said that it's not a checklist. There's no checklist to check all the accessibility requirements. But if we take into account that we have many projects where there are many limitations and we can't spend much time on improving the accessibility, let's say, then what is the best approach to address this issue? How can we establish a set of improvements that would not be very dramatic in terms of efforts, but still would allow us to make some accessibility?
Well, it's funny because you've caught a part of my presentation that contradicts my entire presentation. So I say very clearly, accessibility is not a checklist. It's not. There are checklists, and checklists are great. Those are awesome techniques, but it's not a checklist. It's an ongoing process. Excuse me. So to try to rephrase that, to frame it better, make that list of things. Take that list of tests. Start to integrate it into user stories. Look at it. Look at the pre-built checklist from the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Start with those and start to pull the low-hanging fruit and make it into your own personal checklist. But acknowledge that that checklist does not guarantee accessibility. And that's ultimately my point when I say not a checklist. It doesn't guarantee accessibility. It's a starting point. Once you've got the color contrast down, cross it off your list, but recognize that the second you do an update to the software, that somebody else folds in a new feature or something else, you have to reconsider, was that maintained? As soon as you update the style guides, not the style sheets, but maybe the style guides, you're doing a rebranding, you have to relook at the color contrast. And I'm just using color contrast as one example. So you satisfy it. We did the 4:1 contrast ratio. We're done. Okay. In 6 months, your software evolves. So go back and pay attention to whether or not that's still true.
So I guess we can say that it's an ongoing process of reusing the checklist.
Yes. And refining that checklist and updating that checklist.
But that's almost a standard test-driven approach, right? So you just have a lot of this in your existing test suite, and any change, you go back over your existing test as a regression test.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. I know it sounded a little contradictory in my slides. That tells me I probably didn't clarify it very well.
So how do you automate this?
You don't. I'm sorry to say. That's what's so painful about this is you want to automate it, and there are some things you can do that are automated. You can do the contrast, and you can do some testing where you script it to go through and make sure that everything has keyword focus support, etc. You can do some of that, but in the end, you still need to take a little bit of time as a human and go through and validate it. The W3C has just started a conversation this week. I haven't been involved in it because I apparently am traveling, about different APIs they can build and best practices they can identify to help automate some of that testing process. At the same time, there are some really cool tools out there. My current favorite is called Tenon, T-E-N-O-N, and Tenon is an add-on for you're a Microsoft shop, right? Okay, so, well, for example, Tenon has an add-on for Visual Studio. And what that will do is it will do some of these basic checks, these checklist style checks. And when you're using Visual Studio and you have the Tenon add-on, it just goes through and says, oh, okay, you have images with no alt text. Are you sure you want that? So there are some tools that will help you in that process, but you still have to get somebody involved on a regular basis. And I'm sure in your testing process, you probably already have humans who do some of the testing anyway.
Well, sort of low-hanging fruit is, of course, regression testing. So that's why I'm asking.
Yeah. Yep.
So do you want to automate your regression testing to spend some time on the new cool stuff we're going to break things with?
Yeah, and that's the sort of thing I think you have to address that on an organization by organization basis and see what fits with your testing plan, your people, etc. I hope that answered. I know it's Okay. Yes.
So I do some development and front-end development, and we try to make it work with screen readers, and there's a lot of different screen readers out there.
Yes.
And they don't work exactly the same.
No.
Is there any statistics you can get find usage, which is used and
You've asked a question that I want to answer so many different ways. So there's a great article that just came out a few days ago about all the different accessibility APIs. Leonie Watson and Charles from Yandex, I forgot his last name now, have put together a great article that talks about the accessibility APIs going back through Windows MSAA. And it's a fascinating read, and it gives you some insight into how Chrome and Internet Explorer, for example, have completely different APIs built into accessibility, for accessibility. And therefore they expose different things in different ways. And then separate from that, just the platform exposing all of that information, now you've got companies like Freedom Scientific who build JAWS, who don't support ARIA very well, except they're finally doing it in their next release. And then you've got NVDA, which is made by some guys out of Australia who are genius. These two, they're blind. They're smarter. Half of one of them is smarter than three of me put together. I had dinner with them last week. One of them just jumped out of a plane intentionally. And they're fearless, and they built a great tool, and it works differently than JAWS. And iOS has some great stuff built into it, but it's regressed in the iOS 8 release, which is causing a lot of users a lot of frustration because things that used to work well, broken. It's a moving target. It really is. Now, I sort of framed it for you. We have been talking in the Accessibility Task Force about, is it worth allowing some tracking? Because right now, the assistive technology layer is on top of the browser. The browser reports, hey, I'm Internet Explorer version 11. I'm Chrome version whatever, 40. But it doesn't report that there is any AT, assistive technology. There's no AT with it. And in general, the disabled community says, no, we don't want that. We don't want to expose that information. Because as soon as you do that, I think I had a bunch of slides I cut out on that because not enough people asked, and I'm really glad you did. They don't want that because they know that as soon as you can browser sniff, somebody's using assistive technology, they get shunted to a different experience. They don't want a different experience. They want the same experience. And it's that simple. So you're not going to be able to test it. The statistics on that are all over the map depending on the market, the audience, the affluence level, so many factors. So I could dig some up for you. I don't even bother looking anymore because it's so difficult to nail it down for a target.
Yeah, I understand here in Sweden also it depends on which part of the country you're in, if you're going to get it from the government paid.
Yeah.
Because this screen readers cost a lot of money.
And that,
some parts you get jobs, some parts you get this, Australian guys.
NVDA,
Yeah.
which is free. And
okay, that wasn't that one.
well, no, NVDA is free, but they want you to donate some money because it's their side project. And there are a couple others out there. Those are just the couple I always focus on.
But I guess if you get one screen reader paid for it, you usually probably don't buy another one.
Yes.
Slightly better.
Well, you learn all the keyboard shortcuts. If you're a blind user and you're using a screen reader, you don't want to remap all of that muscle memory to a whole new set of commands.
Yeah.
It's a pain in the ass. I'm sorry, I'm saying inappropriate things.
It's very easy to end up in the screen reader, and it's kind of frustrating also because you know the page, how it looks, and the visitor will not know. It's very hard to simulate being totally blind
Yeah.
and try out your own page that you've been working on.
You are describing a pain point in the accessibility community. And it's not changing soon. It's getting better, but they're not going to reach complete feature parity. I was at the CSUN conference. Are you familiar with CSUN? So CSUN is a university in California, and they hold their annual technical conference on users with disabilities. I probably got it a little bit wrong. But it's this 4-day plus a couple pre-workshop days. 4-day extravaganza where everybody comes in and talks about accessibility in software and in the educational world. And companies like Freedom Scientific and the guys behind NVDA and Microsoft and Google and all the consultants all come together. I swear, some of us who go there just want to see them fight. We just want to see the Freedom Scientific guys get slapped around by NVDA, and then we want to see Google come in and use their massive weight and smash the floor and everything. It's an ongoing battle, and I feel your pain, and I want to tell you that there's a great way around it, and there isn't. There just isn't. The things that I've tried to outline here, though, these general techniques, have the broadest support, too. That's part of the reason why I generally counsel people to use these techniques, because you're not going to get everything, but you're going to get to that 80, maybe 90% mark. That was a really long answer, wasn't it? Was that helpful at all?
Yeah. Well,
No. Hey, thanks for nothing. Really glad I came here today. Please tell me you live in the city.
I live in the city, yeah.
You live here. Okay, so you didn't have to drive too far to be disappointed in my answers. Okay. I had to fly halfway around the planet to disappoint you, though.
That's commitment.
It is. It is. And
We're trying to make a booking application for the public training company, SJ.
Yep.
The single page application, lots of JavaScript, lots of things happening. It's not easy to make it accessible.
What library are you using? Angular?
Yeah.
Okay, lucky guess. SPAs are all about Angular. Are you using the NG ARIA add-on library?
No.
Okay, so Marcy Sutton, out of somewhere on the left coast of the U.S., I think Seattle. She is not the person who created it, but she popularized it. It's a full library that you just drop into your Angular library collections, and it will start to add a lot of this ARIA stuff to the controls.
That sounds very
And it's a huge step forward, because with Angular, what does it do? You look at the rendered source, and it's painful to look at, isn't it? It hurts. Okay, so I'm offended by it, but that's just me. But we use it for some single-page applications as well, and that library can do a great job of getting you over some of those hurdles. It won't get you all the way there, but it builds in. NG, lowercase ng, and then capital ARIA. Yeah, and if you cannot find it, tell me, and I'll tweet an address, or I'll put you in touch with the people behind it. It's a really handy library. And another great one to use if you're using Angular in conjunction with Bootstrap. A lot of people are. Bootstrap has built-in crap accessibility. It's really not good. So go to PayPal has a Bootstrap accessibility plugin library. PayPal. And that's because the guy who used to be at PayPal is the guy who's written all this other really neat accessible stuff like Easy Chirp, which is a Twitter client for blind users who want to use pictures, etc. But the Bootstrap accessibility plugin, and there's a more proper name I've forgotten, helps take care of some of those simple things like outline none and focus styles, etc. So those two, and you're describing an environment, I feel your pain. NG ARIA, CSS, the Bootstrap accessibility plugin, and you're going to move ahead a good deal. You'll still have to do all the manual stuff, though. I want to talk, but that's okay. Other questions? Yes?
I used to develop an application for maps.
Mm-hmm.
So the map is in the center, and then you have like a search function. So I don't really understand how this accessibility technologies can help, for example, blind users with screen readers to access such applications.
So were you using Google Maps?
No, it's Leaflet. It's a library, a custom library for maps.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one.
No.
But for example, we've used the Google Maps approach, and a lot of the stuff that gets rendered to the map is rendered in generic elements. Mm-hmm. A blind user obviously doesn't care about the spatial relation. Excuse me. But if you're displaying things on a map, include information. If it's 5 kilometers away from their search target, include that in the description. All those items can be individual list items within a larger list that you then position on the map where they need to appear. The idea there is once you turn off the images in the CSS, if you essentially have a list of text that says location 1, 5 kilometers from your search place, here are the coordinates, position 2, etc., that's more useful than not. And if you're worried that puts too much text on the screen, So the sighted user is just going to see a lot of all this 5 miles from the center. I can see that. You need to tell me. Then use CSS to hide that. And you have different techniques you can use with ARIA, with CSS, depending on the context. And I don't know enough about it, but depending on context, you can make it visually hidden, but still available to the screen reader. And that can be as simple as just having it display outside of the box and clipping it so there's no overflow in the box. So now you can have a really verbose list of locations, maybe sorted already based on distance, and I can hear it. There's 20 locations, they're getting progressively further away. I like option 3. Whereas when I'm looking at the map, that one. So you've made something that works in both cases, and all you're really doing is changing your divs to LIs when inside an ordered list or an unordered list, and adding some extra text that you hide visually. It's a very generic answer,
Yeah.
but I've done this, so I hope that helps you out somewhat. Other questions? I mean, if you don't ask me questions, there's a chance I'll just start talking again. Yes.
I guess you check out a lot of websites as soon as the first time you see them and so on. How do you see the state of the web at the moment? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse?
In the context of accessibility?
Yes.
I think it's actually getting better. I think there has been some wonderful progress made on the conceptual side, and it's starting to finally affect developers. So when something like Angular is released, Angular is released and God kills 1,000 kittens. I mean, that's the way I felt. But then some people stepped in to build these add-on libraries. The issue is people don't always know these libraries exist, but somebody's building them. And because the community tends to talk, people find out about it. The issue isn't so much about providing the technology for accessibility. I talked about all these wonderful add-ons and ARIA and everything else. The technology and the support is there. The assistive technology, the screeners, etc., are accessible to more and more people now. This wonderful framework is there. The only thing that's missing is all the developers buying into it. And now conferences typically will have one accessibility talk. It's a token talk, and it's often terrible, which is why I started speaking on this, because that talk is often not useful, but they're starting to at least pay attention to it. You'll find it more at conferences. You'll see the traditional web publications talking about it. The information is often not good, has many errors in it, but it's at least getting the conversation going. So you might see Smashing Magazine post an article. Great, read the article and then jump down to the comments. Read the comments and you will see there's a handful of us who jump in and say, wrong, here's the right way to do it, don't mean to beat you up, but this is the right way to do it. And that kind of dialogue is what's really something that didn't exist even 5 years ago. So it's improving. I still think there's a long way to go, and I'm usually pretty sour on it, but I do think it is improving.
And I guess now that there is a greater tendency for people to use third-party components, whether they're Angular, whether they're WordPress plugins. There was that add-on to the contact form, the WordPress contact form,
Which they just released.
You tweeted about this week.
Yep.
And I've gone through all my WordPress sites and added it on, knowing that, crap, I didn't know it was that bad with the plugin I had used, which is the contact form plugin, third-party plugin that everybody uses on WordPress sites. So now there's an add-on that makes those accessible. It's a point, click, 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 done. Much better. Maybe not perfect. Maybe not as good as if we'd gone in and handwritten it ourselves. But in terms of how much additional value you have for the amount of time you've invested, huge.
I'm glad you saw that tweet. I was pretty excited when that came out because right now I manually recode my contact form 7 forms, and it's just annoying. But now that plugin makes it a lot easier, and that's a step in the right direction.
Open source, yeah.
The only problem is it takes 10 years. But it'll get there. Boy, you give it time. Open source will eventually find that right path.
Hey, on Evolve.org, when was the first accessibility article? In the 90s.
Yeah. Yep. It wasn't mine, was it?
No, it's Mark Owners.
Whose?
Mark Owners.
Oh, what the hell? Damn it. Sorry. She beat me. She's the one who beat me? Good for her. Good for her. Other questions? This is free. I mean, I'm bought and paid for it. Oh, maybe that's not the right way to say it. Oh, that's so dirty now. All right. Well, if you oh, okay.
I'm not sure you can answer it, but we're working with a Swedish company called Funka. Have you heard of them?
I can't even say it. No, I have not.
We have one very good thing is that they have some blind people actually testing out.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I'm pretty good with them, but just want some gossip.
You want
if you don't have any gossip about them, then
You want some gossip about them in particular?
yeah, if you heard it.
No, I haven't. But I can tell you that user testing with blind people is the best way to feel stupid. So you've sat with them, right?
Yeah.
So this pace that I'm speaking to you now is reasonable. Now, so if you haven't experienced somebody with a screen reader, I cannot possibly go fast enough. So let me go back and read some words off. No, I'm just going to read that. I'm going to try and read it quickly. Web accessibility and older people meeting the needs of the aging web users. Each expert review of web accessibility, how people with disabilities use the web over it. I mean, that's as fast as I can go.
That's not even half as fast.
Not even close, not even a tenth as fast. So somebody who uses a screen reader will hear an entire page more quickly, a well-coded page in particular, will hear it more quickly than I can visually parse the page. They are more, with a well-coded page, they are a far more efficient user. And it makes me feel like an idiot because I don't even know what that slurry of sounds was. It's just a smear of noise. And it's a computer voice. That's the worst part. It's a computer voice, and they understand it. And they can navigate and move and understand and process this stuff. And I'm on calls with the Accessibility Task Force. We have a weekly call. I think I've missed the last 3 or 4, for obvious reasons, I think. So we have a weekly call. And somebody will say, oh, this bug needs some attention. And we'll go, okay. And we'll all follow the link, which is sent around via IRC. And I'll start to read it, and I'll hear Leonie's laptop in the background. Stop! I'm still on the first sentence. And she's like, oh no, I got this. Don't. So my experience is user testing with blind users is a great way to feel inadequate in life. But that's just me. I know that it's not gossip, but it's just made me think of that anecdote. Sorry. Yeah.
But it's sort of a different thing. But I mean, we have access to Pluralsight, which is a training tool. And all their videos, basically, you can speed up the speech.
Yeah.
And one thing I tend to do, because they're trying to be articulate and therefore speak incredibly slow, and I just want to get on to what I want to see.
Yeah.
So you speed it up until 1.5 or 2 times speed. You actually catch on really, really quick.
Yeah.
And then turn it back to 1.0, and everything just goes.
It's terrible to listen to at normal speed.
Yes.
It's funny. So I'm supposedly going to be doing some work with Pluralsight, and I will speak at this pace, which will still be too slow. So feel free to speed me up, provided I am capable of working this out with them. So I wrote a brief blog post months and months ago. YouTube, when you use the HTML5 video player, you can change the speed of YouTube videos, double them to 1.5 times, 1 3/4, 2 times speed, or slow them down. And I noted this is a really nice accessibility feature. So users with cognitive impairments can slow down a YouTube video and spend more time really focusing on it. And that blog post sat out there for months, ignored. And then one day I started to see a spike in traffic from Hacker News. And I went to Hacker News, I went to see what was causing it, and somebody had posted the full Guardians of the Galaxy movie. I'm sure illegally. They had posted the full thing on YouTube, and the URL kept changing, maybe because of, illegally. But immediately under that, the first top voted post below that was, you can speed it up if you want to watch this thing more quickly. Here, read this blog post, and now you can get through Guardians of the Galaxy, instead of like the 2-hour running time, you can get through it in 1.5 hours, or an hour if you have had a good deal of Red Bull. And that's the most popular post on my site right now. I wrote it as an accessibility feature, and it has been co-opted into a great way to stream pirated movies before they get taken down. Okay, it's only going to be up for 3 hours. So, hey, that's a great way where accessibility benefits everyone.
Now, on YouTube, I get incredibly annoyed with walkthroughs of stuff. It's like, no. Right, I just want to know how to do this. I can probably read it in 100 words, but you want to show me. And we click over here. No, kill me now.
Unboxing videos are much better at double speed. It's like Christmas when I was 6. And that's just me. Right. Any other questions, comments?
We've got this spaced for at least another half hour, and there are beers in the fridge. So why don't we just
We'll call it there.
end the formal bit and move on to the beers in the fridge.
All right.
So thank you hugely, Adrian.